Hey, it's Thomas Mulready from CoolCleveland, and we have the great pleasure and privilege of sitting down today with Billy Bass. We know you as disc jockey here in Cleveland. You went on to be in the record business as well. Thank you for taking a few moments here to talk about this book right here.
Oh, Invisible Soul, Carlo Wolff. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk about it, huh?
We are going to talk about it.
Let's do it.
If you're ready.
I'm ready.
If you want.
Well, I did read a lot of it, so.
Well, good. Good. And, you know, it's been great to get to know you. And I think when this book came, you and I were together, and I looked at you, I said, hey, what do you think? You grew up in this time frame. This is your music.
That's really important that you said that, because I did grow up when in the time frame that he's particularly talking about at the beginning of the book. Right. Which I was very impressed with.
Exactly. So it's called Invisible Soul, Uncovering Cleveland's Underground Soul Scene. It's written by Carlo Wolff with James O'Hare, illustrations by Ron Hill, and it's published by a local company called Act 3, which is James O'Hare and Ron Hill and Jamie Lombardo. So shout out to them for getting this thing published, and to Carlo, who he said he worked on this for 11 or 12 years. Wow. 60 interviews, he said he did over that time frame. So it's a real passion for him.
You can tell he put a lot of work into it.
Right. Yeah, he talks about it in the book, how growing up as a kid, you know, soul music was important to him, even as a white kid, you know. And even though this is really the time frame here is mid-50s through the mid-80s, when this time frame in Cleveland for the soul scene that he talks about. You and I are very different. Your time frame was probably 50s, 60s, and then into the 70s when you were in the music business.
Or in the regarding radio and records here in Cleveland, yeah.
Right.
The scene. I was involved in the scene here up until the middle 70s.
And then you went into the industry and you were nationwide, LA, New York, back and forth.
With Chrysalis Records, had a lot of hits, man.
Yes, you did.
Hits are important to me. You know that, right? I love hits.
You love it.
Got to be a hit record.
You can tell within seconds of hearing a record.
Yeah, if it's a hit.
Whether it's a hit or not.
And if it's not a hit, I'll get it out of here.
Take it off. Next.
Yeah. So anyway, the fact that he explored the 50s is what interested me, because very early in the book he mentions the Circle Theater, and the Circle Theater was really important to the scene, the music scene, I like to refer to it.
Sure.
You know, growing up in the 50s, I was a teenager in the 50s. So the music, you know, when you're a teenager, the music means everything in the world to you, right? Unless you're sports, you know, whatever.
Either or.
Yeah, either
one
or
the other.
But music meant the world to me, and listening to music and listening to the radio and knowing what the disc jockeys were going to play in. Now, all that was so important. And back in the 50s, the main disc jockey was Moondog, Alan Freed. And I mean, he was so big and so popular that when we had recess, so I went to a Catholic school. When we had recess, you had to know what Alan Freed played the night before. Like, you didn't know whether Larry Doby hit a home run or not, but you knew that Alan Freed played a Joe Tex record, and that record was a bomb. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it was, the 50s were really important to me and really important to the music scene in Cleveland. Yeah. And I kind of feel like I grew up with the scene. So I'm connected to it.
Yeah, and Carlo in this book really taps into that. He admits, you know, that he didn't grow up in this. He says he was sheltered and spoiled, you know, as a young Jewish kid. He's comes up in Boston and Albany. He doesn't really even come to Cleveland until the 80s, mid-80s. But he's fascinated with this music, and so he really did his research and dug up a lot of the music, the artists, the venues. And I think that's where you picked up on it, was that he does talk about the specific places that this music happened in. He calls it the 105 because it's East 105th and Euclid area, which is now University Circle area, and the surrounding area. And I wondered, because that was the first time I had heard that, you know, name for it. Is that what you guys called it at the time, or did you have a name?
No, it was called, it was Midtown.
Okay. All right.
It was 105th. We did call it 105th.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But that area, because it was full of retail as well as a couple of places for music, but it was full of retail and candy stores and drug stores and stuff like that.
That was one of the cool things was learning about places like the Circle Theater, which was a pretty big place, 2,000 seats.
The Circle Theater was everything to me. Wow. I mean, everything. Don't ask me how I could afford to go there because I never had any money. So I can't remember, but I saw a lot of shows, so I must have figured out how to sneak in maybe or talk somebody into taking me in with them. Yeah. But, you know, this was during a time of puberty and I go to the Circle Theater and hear Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, but the opening act always was a shake dancer. So I went as often as possible, but it was cool because it was uptown, and because it was a town, you know, it attracted people from all over, and it was safe. It was a really safe place to go. So it wasn't just a soul, or I shouldn't say that. It wasn't just a black thing. It wasn't just a black neighborhood thing. It was a neighborhood.
Right.
You know, just like any other retail neighborhood.
Right. Yeah, there was so many of these venues that I had not even heard about, because you maybe have heard about Leo's Casino, La Cave was up there. I think I heard of the La Alhambra before.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a lot about that if you want me to jump right into that.
I would love you to jump right in. Yeah.
So, yeah, the Circle Theater was at 105th. La Cave was in that area too, 105th. The Alhambra was up there. Now the Alhambra and that 105 scene, as Carlo talks about it, that really didn't start until the 60s or the 70s really. Right. But the Circle Theater was back in the 50s. And the next evolution of the Circle Theater was Leo's Casino. So those two things are so important to me and to the whole scene in Cleveland, Ohio. And I'll tell you why. And I don't mean to be critical, because I should say right off the top, Carlo is a good friend of mine. I really like Carlo, and I like the way he writes, and I like the fact that he dug into this book. So, you know, it's a reference book. It belongs in the Cleveland Public Library. I mean, everybody should know what he wrote about, because it happened. One thing I have a problem with is that he looks back on it, but his view of it is as a white guy looking back on it. And during this time where the Circle Theater and Leo's Casino was everything, there was no black and white. The Circle Theater, it was the music, that was what it was. And it was R&B. You know, R&B music didn't become black music until maybe the 70s. You know, the record companies started calling it black music, but it was R&B music. You know, first it was blues, then it was rhythm and blues, and then it was rock and roll. And that's the evolution of music.
It was pop music, right? It was just what was popular.
Yeah, it was pop.
They had hits, they had great songs,
exactly,
and they were well known, and you'd go see them. You didn't even have a name for it, I guess.
Well, black people didn't think of Motown as black music. Motown was Motown. Now, people that came from the West Side to Leo's Casino, they came to hear Motown. They didn't come to hear black music. They came to hear Motown. That distinction should be made. Carlo didn't make that distinction, but I want to make that.
Because again, he's looking back, as you say, from years later to after music had been divided out into all its subcategories.
Right.
It seems that in the 50s especially, and into the 60s, and when you were on Wixie 1260, even at that point, it was Motown right up against a ballad, right up against Tom Jones, right up against the Beatles. You know, everything was pop.
Or Billy Joe Royal, or Bobby Gentry, or even what's his name, the guy in black. What's his name?
Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash. I mean, yeah, he was. You know, all of it all blended together. As you said, it was pop.
Pop music, right? And there is, I mean, even with the title here, calling it, you know, Invisible Soul, I keep thinking, wasn't invisible to all those thousands of people who were, he makes a point of, this was the center of the universe and so many people were there. how do you end up calling that invisible? Only looking back to it from someone like myself who comes from the suburbs and who wasn't there at the time and only heard about it, and now I'm reading about it. Well, it was invisible to me until you start to learn about it, and then it's still just music.
And it's funny because soul music really didn't become soul music until James Brown was the godfather of soul.
There you go.
And Aretha Franklin was the queen of soul. That's when that term. But before that, it was strictly R&B. That's what it was.
Right.
And it had no racial overtones. It was just R&B music.
Right.
It wasn't black music. See, when you say black music like that, I understand what happened, and we'll talk about that as it gets to the 70s. But back then, to call it black music would have been insulting to the performers.
Yeah, it just seemed like it was the place where everything was happening, and it was the place where good music was happening. And if you wanted to see it, you had to go there to see it. It wasn't happening on the west side. It wasn't happening down in the suburbs. That was where the venues were, and they were bringing in acts from Motown from around the country.
Yeah, because the venues were in what would be called again, we weren't black yet.
No,
we were Negroes, or we were colored people. Those were the phrases in the 50s when all this was happening, when the Circle Theater was happening. But when we became black, that was in the 60s. We became black. It's kind of funny how that works. I don't know any other nationality. Well, I guess Hispanics went through that. Yeah.
And wasn't it the rise of
Asians
corporate?
Went through that.
Yeah, corporate music, deciding, hey, we can break this one off and develop this as a separate one for a separate audience.
Right.
And so now you have a different radio station with a different format on a different spot in the dial.
Right.
We can do something over here for Latino. We can break this off, and all of a sudden you've got, so many different audiences.
How many different rock formats were they, in the 70s and 80s? Alternative rock, chicken rock, they called it. Remember that phrase, chicken rock? Yeah. Or underground rock, or
classic rock came out eventually, looking back on this period. So, there was some, this whole neighborhood here, St. Clair to Kinsman, and East 55th University Circuit, that's a pretty big area. I always thought of it as just the one area around 105th, but it's a pretty big place. Do you remember some of your favorite artists that you went to see either at the Circle Theater or Leo's Casino?
Oh, yeah, I can tell you. Let's go back to the Circle Theater. Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. The El Dorados, a lot of doo-wop bands, a lot of doo-wop singers. Again, I tell you, I always want to mention, I wish I knew their names, but I always want to mention the stripteasers, because that was, that was the show, baby. It was like burlesque, really. They had a comedian, a dancer, and then the big act. But almost all of the doo-wops, the El Dorados, the Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, I saw. That was the best show ever. Joe Tex, I saw. And I think there was some early Motown bands, like Jimmy Walker and the All-Stars. I think they were there, but my memory could be a little tricky on that one.
Right.
I do remember the doo-wop bands, the El Dorados, and all the, let me think of some more names. The Penguins. All these kind of crazy names, but they were fun. They were good singing groups, we called them.
Vocal groups.
Yeah, we called them singing groups back in the day. Now they're bands. They're bands. Where's the band? Where's the instrument? I don't see any band up there.
Just four guys.
Yeah, four guys singing and dancing. What the hell is that?
Right. You mentioned Motown, and Carlo makes the point in this book of the fact that Motown was such an industry, and it cranked out so many artists. And he does focus on local Cleveland artists who came up in this neighborhood as well.
Like the OJs.
Like the OJs. The Daz Band they got pretty big. They got a Grammy.
Huge hit.
Yeah, massive. But going back to the four that he really focuses on, Art Blakey, Travis Haddix, George Hendricks, and Lou Ragland are the four. They each almost get their own chapter in this book and tell their own story, which I thought was again, for me, I don't want to speak for you. You know, I didn't know these artists much. Only heard about them in passing, and to hear them and speak in their own words, it was somewhat enlightening. I don't know what you thought of that focus.
No, well, again, I'm a rock and roller, rhythm and blues, pop music guy. So Art Blakey to me was always jazz, and a lot of those guys that you just mentioned, I really didn't pay that much attention to. You know, I'm glad that Carlo wrote the book, because had I written that book, they would have been left out. You know, my focus would have just been on the people that made hit records.
Right.
There it is again.
No, he goes on. Jimmy Scott, Sly, Slick, and Wicked, they made a little impact. Wild Cherry was huge from this area.
One record.
One great record. It's still great and still kills.
But the Dazz Band was different. They had one big hit, but they had a following because they could really play. They were funky. And they were at the height of that funk movement, I thought, in the mid '70s. They were great. Loved them. They could work all over the world, just off that one hit.
Edwin Starr.
Out of Detroit, though.
But apparently he's from Cleveland, but he made his name in Detroit, right? But we're kind of claiming him. Eddie Backus Sr., he focused on him, organist. Harvey Hall. And he also, you know, does a lot of focus. He quotes Harvey Hall of Harvey and the Phenomenals, Cleveland artist, who says, "I've seen it go from sugar to shit." Talking about this neighborhood, and he talks a lot. Actually, dwells on it. He doesn't just mention it in passing, but he starts with it. He continually brings it up throughout the book that this neighborhood was great. And now it's gone, and it was really cool culturally, and now it's the center for Cleveland Clinic and, you know, Case Western Reserve, and all the poverty and racism. I mean, he brings up a lot of these sociological issues that are woven throughout the book, which I didn't know how you felt about.
I thought that was another book, really. I hate to say anything negative against my man Carlo, because he is a good friend, but that's a whole separate subject, and that's only if you want to look at it through that prism, you know, through what was going on. But to structure it within the music format, I think is ill-conceived, because it's so much bigger than that. It's poverty. It's not, you know, a lot of things were going on to make the neighborhood change. It was the fact that you couldn't get a loan at a bank. You couldn't figure out how to fix up your place. You didn't have the money. You didn't have a job. You weren't earning enough. You know, there's a lot of factors that caused that neighborhood to go down. When I grew up on 81st and Cedar, 81st and Cedar was a beautiful neighborhood. It was where, you know, kids could play in the street. You couldn't step on Miss Dangerfield's lawn because she was out there cleaning her lawn. Everybody our lawns were as big as postage stamps, but they were all well kept and immaculate, right? So Carlo's view of that is a little, like I said, he's looking at it historically from his perspective, from even now he's looking back on it. But back then, it was a great place to live.
You know, you mentioned how race really wasn't the most important factor, or maybe wasn't even a factor at all, that people were there for the music.
It wasn't a factor at all. Now, as I said to you, I think when we had an earlier conversation, people came to Leo's Casino for the music. They didn't come to Leo's Casino for the black music. They didn't come to Leo's Casino to gawk at black people. They came to Leo's Casino because it was the cool place to go. Now, when they went back home, maybe they talked all that, you know, whatever crap they wanted to talk. But at Leo's Casino, it was a group of people that loved the music, whether they were black or white or whatever. And I can tell you, I don't think, now, Carlo may know better than I, but I don't think there was ever a racial incident, fighting or anything like that at Leo's Casino, because that wasn't the attraction. The people that came to groove on the music. Did he mention that? Because I'll be honest with you, I kind of skipped over a lot of the book.
I don't think that anything like that. He does talk about Sid and Kay Friedman of the Circle Theater, and I think because it was so big and there was a lot of cash, and their concern being white in the middle of that neighborhood, so that he does bring a little bit of that up, but not that there's. In fact, the one he talks about, I think, was Ray Charles, who wouldn't perform until he got his money, and that was the biggest controversy that happened.
Well, let me tell you something. That's how it started, but that's the way it is today. Nobody goes on without getting paid. That's What? I'm going to go out and play and not get paid? Are you crazy? Yeah. So that's that's just
just people talking.
That's part of Ray Charles's legacy.
Right.
But I can tell you, I managed Luther Vandross. We had the same deal. That was in the 90s.
Yeah.
No, we don't show up unless we got paid. That's it.
Oh, we hear some stories we could tell. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where we got a lot going on here of artists who refused. People waited a half hour to wait. They were still in their hotel room waiting for their money.
Yeah, because if you go on and play and without getting paid, you're not going to get paid. The promoters will come up with all kind of reasons why we can't pay you. Well, the house wasn't sold out, or this or that happened. Yeah, right.
Right.
But we were here. We played.
There's a mention of the Northern Soul movement in Great Britain, where they collect the vinyl and they love it. And it almost seemed like, and again, I'm a vinyl collector, Carlo is, and so we're coming at it from that kind of white, perspective. And
what's with you guys that everything has to be white or black? I don't get it. I don't understand that.
I think, as you say, it's the time. Now everything is racialized, and we look back, and it was a very different time. And the neighborhoods have changed. And so when we think about going into a neighborhood to see an all-black club with all-black patrons and all-black artists, it's a different vibe. And that's why I love hearing how you grew up, because it wasn't like that. It was very open. It was almost non-racial. Not that there weren't incidents, but it certainly isn't how it is now. And when we look back, it's different. Not that it's right or wrong. But he does say this. This is a quote from Carlo in the book. Some might say that as a white man attempting to tell a black story, my efforts are presumptuous, yet another manifestation of cultural colonialism. Rest assured, this book aims to enlighten, heal, and tell of another side of life. You think he succeeded in that?
Maybe. See, I can't tell. Maybe certain people will feel enlightened by it, but I think I don't want to speak for anybody else, but for me, I was kind of insulted by it.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was way too focused on the racial issue when the title of the book is about soul music. So I want to hear about that. Make me feel good about the music, not about Again, I said there's two different books. He could. All of that could have been in another book.
Yeah.
But maybe I want to give him credit. As you said, looking back on it, he can't separate the two.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what he was trying to do, is make sure that we understood that even though we're sitting in Leo's casino and there's white people and black people and Hispanic people and gay people enjoying the music, when they went home, life was different. And maybe that's what the point he's trying to make.
That is a good point, that the music itself was healing while it was playing, while we all loved the music, as you say, talking about it the next day.
Right.
And I didn't get that out of this book. I didn't get that part of the celebration, where this was the healing part, not the divisive part.
Exactly.
The divisive part sort of came later, and it was outside of these great venues. But once you were in there, we were all in the same club. You're all there for the music, right? Right.
And everybody in there was best friends with the guy next to you, no matter what color that person was. Yeah. They were sitting bobbing their head or tapping their feet and grooving and singing along or whatever. It was just so much fun to be in that environment. Yeah. And it was so great to be in that environment because, again, back to his point, if you go back to the neighborhood and everybody is black and there's no diversity whatsoever, well, you fall into that.
Yeah.
And just like the white people that went back to their neighborhood, they'd fall right back into it.
Yeah. Part of this mission of this book, this is Carlo again saying, part of the mission of this book is to begin to set the record straight by telling a black story shot through with white participation. It's as much about race as it is about music.
It's too much about race and not enough about music, Carlo. No offense, because you know I like you a lot, but dude,
right?
Seriously.
Yeah. I think here's another great quote that I love. This book aims to get people talking, and that's exactly what it did.
Okay, Carlo, way to go.
We're on board with that.
Because you and I have had plenty of conversations about this music and its effect, and and when I do my tours over at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I always talk about how this music started off as blues, and then it evolved to R&B. I never say it started off with black guys sitting around playing the blues. No, it was blues, whoever it, or it was country, or it was bluegrass. This pop music that we hear now came from those elements. So it's a big blend of all of that. And it's the same chord progressions. It's the same backbeat. It's almost the same stuff. Just repeated and, added and commercialized.
Maybe hyped up a little bit, maybe a little harder on the drums.
Yeah, but it's the same stuff.
Same stuff. Well, Billy, thank you so much for sitting down and, reading this book and being honest. I think we appreciate you brought a lot to Cleveland by digging deep in your soul and playing what you felt. And by putting that out on the air here in Cleveland, you changed this town. And by breaking artists like David Bowie, you changed the world, honestly, by digging into your own soul. Okay? And we so appreciate that. Appreciate hearing your perspective on this book.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Good luck,
so
Carlo.
Hey, it's Thomas Mulready from CoolCleveland. We're sitting down with Billy Bass talking about Invisible Soul, uncovering Cleveland's underground soul scene by Carlo Wolff with James O'Hare.